Once upon a time, there were two brothers, Brian and Bart O'Donnell, and both had been born with big humps on their backs. Yet though the brothers were the same in this one way, they were totally different in every other way. Brian was a kindly man, you see, and always saw the good in other folk, whereas Bart was mean and critical of practically everyone, including his brother. Now it was autumn time, close to Halloween and to All Souls' Day, that the Celts called Samain, which means summer's end, a time when the nights drew in and the veil between worlds became very, very thin. A time when sensible folk stayed at home behind locked doors, for it was said that the fairy folk came out from their fairy forts to dance in the fields and meadows at that time, and sometimes they kidnapped men, women, and even children who might be out and about, and no one wanted that, heaven forbid. For when a mortal being was captured like this, they might never come back. And even if they did, it might not be for hundreds and hundreds of years, and everyone they knew and loved would be dead. So everyone stayed put, huddled inside their houses, with the doors tightly locked until the season passed. Well, it just so happened that on this particular night, young Brian O'Donnell had been working in the fields of a neighbouring farm, helping a friend to bring in the last of the summer crops in time for the winter. And they had worked hard until sunset, wanting to get the job done, and it was quite dark before he set off home. He quickened his pace, for he was well aware of all the chilling stories associated with that night, and he was just nearing the edge of his village, and could even see the lights flickering at the cottage windows, and he could smell the wood smoke curling out of the chimneys, and see the silhouette of the tall church spire in the distance, when all at once he heard the sweetest sound of singing and laughter coming from the meadow, and straightway he knew that the fairy folk were near. Delundima, 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 they sang over and over again. Delundima, delundima, delundima. Brian walked on like a sensible young man would, and he picked up his pace, and he kept his eyes firmly focused on the church spire ahead, the lights in the village's windows, the wisps of curling smoke meeting the night air. Oh, but he just could not resist that tune. And before he had time to really think things through, he suddenly turned in his tracks, and there behind him were about 50 fairies with their beautiful, beautiful queen. Delundima, 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 they sang again, delundima, meeting his startled gaze. And very soon, for there was no way back now, he was joining in. He just could not stop himself, for it was quite irresistible. Now Delundimad, in Gaelic, are days of the week, Monday and Tuesday in fact, and they did sound good, set to the melody of the fairy folk. But Brian O'Donnell had the feeling, as he spun around with the song getting faster and faster, that it might be even better, if they added another day. And before he had chance to check himself, he boldly sang out, adding Wednesday to the end of the song. Delundima, 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 decadin. And at that, every single fairy stopped in their tracks and turned and stared at him in utter surprise. "What was that?" exclaimed the fairy queen. "Come here and sing that to me again." So Brian O'Donnell innocently came before the lovely lady and sang, Delundima, 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 decadin. "Well, that's incredible," she said. "We've been singing it the same way for hundreds and hundreds of years and never thought to add another day. Why, that's just perfect, Brian. We love it." And she turned to her fairy troupe, and together they all repeated what Brian O'Donnell had sung. Delundima, 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 decadin. "We love it," they cried. "Thank you, Brian. Thank you." And the fairy queen then took up her rod of power, and she placed it over the back of Brian O'Donnell, who knelt down before her, and in an instant the heavy lump on his back that he had carried since the day he was born was gone, just like that, and he stood up straight for the first time ever and attained his full height, which was actually quite tall. Well, then they all made merry together, dancing and singing until dawn, when the fairy folk returned to their fort and Brian O'Donnell skipped home. Well, as you might imagine, everyone, especially Brian O'Donnell's brother, was amazed to see the miracle that had happened to his twin, and he wanted to know every detail of how it had occurred. And of course, Brian was delighted to tell everything, and he sang again the lovely fairy song, with the addition of the extra day that he had added. "Well," thought Bart O'Donnell to himself, "if this has happened to my brother, it could happen to me." And so the very next night, as the sun began to set, and the villagers retreated to their cottages and bolted their doors once more, Bart O'Donnell set off to the very spot where his brother had gone the night before. And sure enough, the fairy folk were there again, yet in much greater number than before. For you see, news of Brian's wonderful addition to their song had travelled, and fairies had come from far and wide to hear it. Delundima, 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 decadin, they sang out repeatedly as they danced, and by, Bart O'Donnell joined in, just like his brother had done before, and no one seemed to mind in the slightest. "How happy they all seem with this extra day my brother has added," he thought as he danced around. "I can't wait to see how it will be when I add another 2 days to the song." Thursday and Friday should do it, he thought, and he started to imagine himself standing up straight to his full height, just like his brother. Oh, but you see, he had not the musicality of his twin, nor the humility, and so everything came out all wrong. Delundima, 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 decadin, deadin, dahina. And at that, every single fairy stopped in their tracks and turned and stared at him in utter surprise. "What was that?" exclaimed the Fairy Queen. "Come here and sing that to me again." So Bart O'Donnell proudly came before the lovely lady and sang, "Delundima, delundima, delundima, decadine, dehadine, dahina." "Oh, that's just awful," proclaimed the good Queen. "Just awful. There's no rhythm or harmony to that. If you thought you could just come and add on a couple of extra days to our sacred song without due consideration, you are very much mistaken. Now kneel, Bart O'Donnell, and receive your just reward." And quivering with fright, Bart knelt before the Queen, who took up her rod of power as she had done the night before. But instead of removing the hump from Bart's back, she added that which she had taken from his brother to add to his worldly plight. And from that time onward, poor Bart O'Donnell carried 2 humps on his back, whilst his brother skipped lightly and happily through to the end of his days. Make of it what you will, for in truth there is no one way to fix the story's meaning. But be careful if you are out and about after the sun has set on Samain Eve, especially in Ireland, and especially if you hear the fairies sing. Delundima, 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 decadine. Delundima, 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 decadine.